both you and Max have sections in this book, and the Max's section describes what he went through.
Right.
And, it's a similar start. An edict is nailed to the trees around the village that all Jews to report to the nearby ghetto. His dad does a pretty good maneuver where he basically bribes one of the Germans and says, hey, my family can work. All of us can work. And gets the whole family sent to Kommando Flossenburg, which is a forced labor company.
Right.
And he says they go into this kind of self-contained, all-Jewish work camp, and even though they don't get paid, like, they're not being tortured. They view this as a good thing that they're in this forced labor camp.
Right. Well, they need their labor also.
He works there for about a year. And then they get told that they're going to get moved. So they have to break down all the equipment that they're using in this factory. They load it onto trucks. They move it from the trucks to a salt mine, which was a bad decision by the Germans because inside the salt mine, all the equipment starts to rust almost immediately. Yeah. So they have to break it down and pack it up again, which they do. And then they get shipped off again. I'll read this little section here. Soon after donning our blue and white uniform, we enter a long line that moves very slowly. Each person exits the front of the line. I can see them examining their forearm. One man shows us his forearm and blurts in Yiddish, they are tattooing these letters on our arms. How will God view this? He must be an Orthodox Jew. Our faith forbids us to have tattoos. In this moment, I am thankful that we are not Orthodox and were raised to be more relaxed about our faith. I can see the pain on the man's face. Dad assures him, God would never punish you for something you cannot control. The tattoo on his forearm says KL. I intend to find out what that means. So we are waiting in line for a tattoo. I wonder why we need a tattoo here if we didn't need one at the last camp. This new camp is worse in so many ways already. Dad and the other men quickly find out from the inmates that KL is shortened from the word concentration lager.
Konzentrationslager, yeah. Which means concentration
camp.
Right.
The tattoo identifies us as prisoners of a concentration camp. Dad feared we would end up here. So, Max ends up as a worker. Ends up, since he's small, he's only 14 years old, ends up working inside of airplane wings.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He says the Poles hate us and will not help us in any way because once again he's working alongside of Polish people,
right.
normal Polish civilians.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Every night we lay on the straw teeming with lice and bed bugs. There are 300 boys and men per barrack, all of whom are suffering the same challenges. The bug bites make it difficult to sleep at night, and in daytime they cause itchy irritation. In addition, we must wear the same uniform for a month before we get a new one. Getting rid of the bugs is impossible. Sanitation in the labor camp is awful. There is a cold water trough where we rinse our hands and face. There is no soap. There are no showers. Latrines are pits with a wooden board over them. The board has a round opening for us to squat over, but there's no toilet paper. So many people use the latrine, it always stinks. Jewish inmates are assigned to clean it. In fact, I realize now that Jews are doing all the work in the camp. The guards are just directing them. Lunch is a bowl of soup. Dinner is 3 or 4 ounces of bread. Everyone in the camp is weak and malnourished. We go to work no matter what. Everyone knows prisoners who cannot work are shot or sent to the gas chamber.
Yeah, they didn't keep us there to have a good time.
Ends up in another concentration camp called Plaszow? Plaszow. The rumor in the camp is that the Russians are now close to Warsaw and are threatening to override the Germans. The Allies are coming Poland and Germany are bracing for attack. The soldiers here are more tense than at the other camps. We need to be very careful not to test their patience because they become more explosive with every little provocation now. At this camp, we are to do work not in a factory. Instead, we move around the city to dig ditches and build fortifications for the German troops. Once again, you're doing something that's going to help the people that are torturing you and killing you.
We have no choice.
Ends up getting moved again. And again, you got to read this book to get this story. I'm going through the high points of it right now, or the low points, I guess. But in the end, he gets transport again, and Auschwitz is the destination. But the train comes to rest in near Dresden. We remain at this location for nearly a year. We work in the factory. Our work in the factory is consistent and comfortably predictable. We hear with increasing frequency that from the grapevine that the Allies are closer. Even some of the local Germans talk about what will happen if Allies enter Dresden. The night of February 13, 1945, the Allies' saturation bombing of Dresden begins. The sky lights up with flares from the first wave of planes. Subsequent waves of bombers drop phosphorus bombs that cause fires after exploding. The entire city has become a giant torch. When our factory housing gets hit, fire spreads quickly. Pandemonium breaks out as we prisoners run down the stairs to the bomb shelters. The words "survive, survive, survive" repeat in my head like a comforting chant. 2 days later, the bombing is finally over. When we crawl out of the bomb shelter, we see that the factory is half gone and the accommodations upstairs for the inmates is lost. We must now sleep with no roof. It's literally freezing temperatures and we have no blankets. So yeah, that's the bombing of Dresden,
Right.
which was a historical. They bombed with these incendiary bombs, which caught fire, and I want to say 250,000 people were killed in that bombing.
Probably. Yeah.
And a lot of civilians, mostly civilians. And people look at that in various different ways, but at this point in the war, it was a decision that was made. I think Churchill really drove that decision because the Nazis had been bombing and killing civilians in England.
Right.
And he said, okay, well.
Our turn.
Yep. And that's what they did. And of course, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5 book is about coming out of the POW camps, prison camps after that as well, because everything was just destroyed.
Yes. Yeah, they were bombing that city for 2 days.
He gets moved around again, and yeah, they go on they get marched.
Right.
They go on, and I got to read this section. After a few days, the German SS soldiers, with their guns on their shoulders, round up the commando group, and this is them, the Commando Frauenberg group, again, and we set off on a forced march. We are 300 to 350 men marching through the forest into Czechoslovakia. The march takes a few weeks, but feels more like a year, and it is ghastly for our group. We march on one side of the river, watching bombs explode on the other side. With snow on the ground, all of us are freezing as we climb up the mountains. I can't feel my toes and try to walk with my hands tucked into my armpits. We get very little to eat, and we are all starving. We march through several towns as people stand on the side of the road and silently watch. We are told not to speak to the townspeople or accept anything from them, or else we will be shot. Not one person offers us anything. No food or jackets or boots or blankets. It is a disastrous death march from bombed-out Dresden to Litomiris. I see men fall, give up and die, or sit down and refuse to go on. These people are all shot. Dad's health declines and he is in bad shape. He is very weak and cannot walk alone. Fred and I support him on either side with his arms over our shoulders. We get tired after hours of assisting him with other men. When we get tired after hours of assisting him, other men from our group help hold him up. The Germans stuff us in a barn in a barn in a sub-camp our first 2 nights after the death march. At long last, we are given a small amount of food, which is our first food in 8 to 10 days. We sleep on the dirt floors, squashed together to try and stay warm, our first night's sleep in almost 10 days. No one cares about the abhorrent living conditions, and we are completely exhausted and barely alive. 2 days later, when we arrive at the ghetto in late March of 1945, there are only about 80 of our group who are still alive after the forced death march. The rest are dead.
Out of 300.
So, I mean, at this point, they're put into another camp. You know, Max says here everyone is near death, completely exhausted and starving. The camp is overcrowded, filthy, and disorganized. They get marched to a place called the Small Fortress, right, which was just another nightmarish hell. On May 8th, and again, I'm skipping forward, but you got to get this book to read through what actually happened. On May 8th, 1945, Soviet troops enter the Small Fortress to liberate the camps.
Theresienstadt.
And Theresienstadt.
Theresienstadt.
What is that, the name of the town?
Mm-hmm. Theresien.
Could this be the day we had waited so long for? The troops are indeed here to liberate us. Our imprisonment at the hands of the Germans is over at last. Even the weakest of us is celebrating to know we are finally free. We did survive. We are no longer captives, prisoners and slaves to the German Nazis. The 3 of us, so it's Max, Fred, and the dad, their dad, despite all the odds, have survived to today's liberation, although Dad is very likely at death's door.
Yeah.
I can now proudly wear Dad's gold watch chain rather than hide it. And again, there's an incredible story, and it's a similar story to yours in that your dad, Max's dad, had a chain, except for Max kept it with him the whole time.
Right.
And him and his brother Fred traded it back and forth and kept it and hid it over all that time.
Right.
And now he's able to take that watch chain out and actually wear it. He says this: we slowly came to the realization that Dad did not survive the typhus epidemic. Fred and I share a long knowing look. We both know. I can see it in his eyes. Benjamin Schindler is dead. After a quiet period, we begin talking about what likely happened. I hope that Dad lived long enough to know liberation. Fred believes this is true. He says after liberation, people wander around looking confused, relieved, and angry, and all have questions about their loved ones.
Yeah. Max and Fred, they came down with typhoid, so they kept them 6 weeks in one place. And by the time they came out of this disease, they could get up and go outside. They looked for the father, and there was nowhere. Couldn't find him anywhere. So a lot of people died after liberation. Okay, and they buried a lot of people in Theresien, but they had no names because none of us had names in the camps. I mean, when we were in Theresien and Freudenthal, we had the names, but we didn't have it on our clothes or anything. So most camps, if you didn't have the names on your clothes or anything,
there's no way to identify.
No way to identify.
No family to identify.
No.
So when someone died, it was just
that's it.
Nameless body.
Right. So that's what happened to Max's father.
He says here, with the help of the Red Cross, we find out that Mom and Cecilia went to Stutthof, a camp in East Prussia. Mm-hmm. That concentration camp reportedly expanded several times, adding more barracks and extermination chambers during the war. They tell us that Rochella and Cecilia Schindler were killed there. Just before liberation, all surviving inmates were loaded onto barges, pushed out into the Baltic Sea, and were deliberately sunk.
Right.
Our worst fear is realized. We worried about Mom and Cecilia's safety every day. We were suffering in the camps, keeping hope alive that they would survive. Learning with certainty that they are dead is a tremendous blow. The Red Cross also investigated our family in Poland that went into the ghetto. They tell us that our cousins, aunts, uncles, and Grandma Shri